Helen, maybe a good thing I just thought of might be for those who are new, just to like maybe share some of the takeaways from last week. Could be kind of a good way before we get into um, starting with what 2 and 3 is, because I think some folks weren't able to be there, and maybe that might be a good way to give people time to start thinking of their notes, their quotes.
Definitely. So in the last session, we went over the preface and chapter 1. And some of the key takeaways that we just posted online were some things were vulnerable and very heartfelt. And the first one was, the first lie I ever believed is that boys don't cry. Um, the second one was that we realized that patriarchy can only exist through inequality. Obviously, in these next few chapters, we're really going to get into what is patriarchy. Um, the third one is, the will to change is to engage in the process, and that process is messy and difficult. The next one is, accountability happens in community. This is something that impacts all of us, so we can't just sit on the sidelines. And it's on men especially, because men are individual manifestations of it. The next one is, support is a choice and is a reflection of character. It is to say, I want your soul to be well. So those were some of the takeaways that came up for us last week. Robert, would you mind getting off mute and sharing with the group your favorite quote?
Yeah, for sure. Peace, everybody. My name is Robert from Oakland, California, in the Bay Area. The one that came to me was, until we can collectively acknowledge the damage patriarchy causes and the suffering it creates, we cannot address male pain. And did you want me to just say the quote or to talk about it as well?
If you wouldn't mind also naming, if you have the page number, and also talking about it, why it resonated for you.
I don't have the page number, but I'll try to remember that in the future. I think so much of what I've seen growing up as a dude is like kind of the anger or the frustration or the sadness I see in other guys, my father, uncles, grandfather, so many men in my life, and like the way they deal with it a lot. And so what she said about like acknowledging like the suffering it causes, like in the male pain, like that really hit me real hard.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Anybody else? Mark?
Hey everybody, Mark, he, him in Altadena, California. Just on page 30, she just says patriarchy promotes insanity, and that's all. And I feel like it just hits so hard, like you were saying, Helen. Bell Hooks has such a way with just getting straight to the point, and I feel like that line really sums it up. And it's brutal. It's brutally honest, and I think I just, it hits. Yeah.
Steph and Annabelle.
Hi, y'all. My name is Def. Pronouns they, them, he, him.
My name is Annabelle. They, them pronouns.
So I put stack 33, like page 33, like page 32 and 33, but I kind of want to go off of what Mark just tabled, which was the quote of patriarchy is insanity. And that's kind of one of my critiques of the book, is the ableist language, albeit this is 2004, but something we were writing in the margins while reading this last night was thinking like that feels like a punching down, and it's kind of a distraction from how beautiful the rest of the writing is. that feels really ableist because like she's going for this gravity, right? Or even there's this quote from Terrence Real that says, straight jacketing our kids. And it's just like, yo, I'm gonna need you to hit the brakes on that. Because that's a different thing. And that doesn't need to be conflated. So I think that to me, although it hit, right? It did have gravity, but I think it's something to be critiqued that we're kind of conflating what we actually mean, because patriarchy is a poison.
What?
And yeah, so okay. What I was thinking though, or like what really hit me yesterday was page 33 in the hardback. The paragraph in there I starred, to end patriarchy, we must challenge both its psychological and its concrete manifestations in daily life. There are folks who are able to critique patriarchy, but unable to act in an anti-patriarchal manner. And I just put like an exclamation point because it's the air we breathe, you know. It's surrounding us, and I think it's something that is like, we can critique it, but we also have to literally critique the air we breathe and understand that it's manifesting in us in ways that are just like, you're a fish in water. You don't think about it. You're just swimming in it, and it's terrible and it's hurting you. I don't know if you had any.
I think I pretty much said what I was thinking about in terms of ableism. That was something that we talked about last night, and we read further and saw that it said poisonous, something to that effect. And I thought that was just such a better metaphor, because it still remains that there's someone who's accountable for it. With poison, it's an action that's harmful rather than a way of being that someone can't control. And what I wrote, it made me write something yesterday, which was basically bodies cannot be used as subjects of scrutiny, even in service to liberation of other bodies. And I just thought that that was what it makes me think. But I mean, that was our only real criticism of this book. It's just been so incredibly it's enlightening and useful already. So yeah, really grateful to be here.
Yeah, we likened it to like when you listen into a really good rap song and then he just says that misogynist weird shit. You're like, where's that weird dick shit coming from? Like I love the rest of this song though. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you, Def and Annabelle, and everyone that spoke. We definitely welcome critical thought. Like that's definitely the point of the space, is just for us to like sit and question, you know, everything that all the information that we're receiving, and even our Black feminist sisters, there's like definitely room for growth. So definitely heard on the part of ableism. I think there's a way to critique psychological, the effects of psychological patriarchy, and still, you know, kind of use language that uplifts folks and like isn't ableist. And yeah, I mean, I also like appreciate the piece about understanding its manifestations in daily life. There's like, patriarchy is big in that it's like it shows up in our systems and in our institutions and in the government and schools and the way everything is set up, but then it also is like small too in the little things and like how we move in our everyday and interact with each other, even how we see ourselves, all of those things. So definitely feel that. And I think that Aja is next on Stack. You want to take yourself
I
off
just
mute?
had a response. Well, I had a question for the group that I wanted to pose to Def and Annabelle, but also the group around the statement of promoting insanity and because she also goes into the psychological ramifications of what patriarchy is. So as someone who may not fully understand what ableism means, I mean, I know, but I'm saying for the group, I think it would be good to kind of go into what that is and probably also delve into why this reflects that, because as I read it, I didn't see it as reflecting that. So I wanted to kind of see where the thinking is, because I'm sure there's others who are probably also grappling with that.
Hello, sorry I'm late.
All good.
Hi.
Thank you for joining. Did anybody want to respond to Aja's question?
What was her question?
I guess it would be for Def and Annabelle, because since they brought it up. But what is the as they brought up the way that in that page on page 30, what Mark mentioned, which is that patriarchy promotes insanity, and that there are certain moments, I guess, that they felt that was reflective of ableism, or in some way maybe, you know, I would like to know, one, why they felt that, and two, if they could expound on what ableism is for folks who are not aware of that. Because that line resonated so much with me, and as someone who knows that a big part of my family's struggle with mental health is directly correlated to patriarchy. So for her to make that statement to me feels actually very valid. And that what it didn't feel like it was a judgment on insanity, but rather that it was a statement of the fact that patriarchy brings people to a point of quote unquote hysteria, or being seeming irrational because of the ways that they respond to patriarchy. That oftentimes, like, there's a way that when one is naming that patriarchy is an issue, one is made to be seem as if one is crazy, or as if one is, quote unquote, like, not rational, not thinking right. And so I think that the idea of insanity is the term, and what it's defined as is the state of extreme irrationality, this state of going mad. And I do think that patriarchy does cultivate that energy. And I think a lot of us are struggling with mental health right now in this country. I don't think that that's divorced of the systemic problems that patriarchy has inflicted on us. And I think we think it's our individual problem. It's our individual inability to succeed, inability to produce, inability to be these things that patriarchy says we need to be. But that quest to do those things, I feel, is what brings about the quote unquote insanity within our people. So I would definitely would love to learn more about other people's perspectives on that.
Oh, you had something.
Oh,
to
sure.
share.
Yeah, I completely feel you that there's a relationality there. I've just heard that it's a slur. The word insanity itself is a slur, as well as crazy and mad is a self-used term from what I've heard. And I'm totally like open to updating those terms if that's not the case. That's just what I've heard. And I think it being in 2004, like, sentiment completely resonates. And I am excited for hopefully updated language to like continue to push forward and just hold space for even more respect. I love the use of what you said, irrationality. I think that's an even more specific way to put it, but maybe it doesn't have that same gravity. And I just wonder how much of that gravity is because of other very systemically organized ranking systems within this paradigm that include ableism. Like, I wonder if it has that gravity because we have collectively agreed upon the insignificance and disposability of disabled bodies. So I wonder if that has a part to play with why that gravity was used there. So yeah.
I think it also includes like context of those words too, as well. The context of how you say those things.
Who's saying that? Sorry, I want to hear who said that.
It's Falana, but I'm under my sister's name. I'm actually trying to get in on my laptop and I'm waiting to be let in.
Oh, it says it's loading for you. It says joining.
Okay, yes, this is my sister's account, but my name's Falana.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing what you shared.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. I think that Ken was next up on stack.
Thank you. How's it going, y'all? My name is Akeen. Go by he, him. I'm currently in Detroit, Michigan. Um, One piece that really spoke to me on page 23 when she says, most of our learning of patriarchal attitudes um, in our family of origin, and they were usually taught by us by mothers. That really like made me stop and really reevaluate like my adolescence. And for me, it was more so because I had two older sisters. Um, it kind of really resonated with me. And then especially when she was talking about like that shaming of like what is deemed um, non-masculine, um, made me really think and gave me like understanding of how at the time I didn't understand it, but how it almost like came from a place of love of trying to prepare me for um, society outside of the home.
Thank you. I just wanted to uplift some of what was going on in the chat as folks start to think about any other quotes that resonated. Brittany said, I know so many men that once hit adolescence had psychotic breaks from all the trauma they held in, not refuting that the language is ableist, of course. Ableism is very normalized in our culture. I do hope we can learn better language to create texts just as powerful in the future. Maddie Clark says, I feel like Bell Hooks is correctly using insanity to describe a systemic force while using it to describe people when it's a slur. Maddie, I was wondering if you wanted to speak more to that, actually.
Hi. I actually don't have a whole lot more there. I guess I'm thinking about how I've heard insanity many times applied to many different forces and the world in general being insane. And I personally find relief and catharsis in that, in using that kind of language to describe the systemic forces that we're up against. Yeah, I mean, this is an issue close to home because I have a brother with special needs, so I'm very sensitive to that. But I do think there's an important distinction to use words when we look at the definition of insanity and we apply that to patriarchy. I feel like it's an apt use of the term, but it's a slur if we use a term like that to describe people, whether they're disabled or not.
That's helpful. Thank you for clarifying, Maddie. I think next on Stack is Tiffany.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to kind of add to what Def and Annabelle said because I kind of see it from like at the beginning of reading, especially I'm on the PDF version, page 48. She says, boys are brutalized and victimized by patriarchy. And I even circle those words and I'm like, that's kind of harsh. But then in the next page on page 49, she talks about how she'll mention these ideas of patriarchy and people will laugh. And that's actually my favorite quote because she says, the laughter is itself a weapon of patriarchal terrorism. It functioned as a disclaimer, discounting the significance of what is being named. It suggests that words themselves are problematic and not the system they describe. So then it goes to kind of Aja's point where it's like, we kind of focus on the diction, on the words being said, but really she's trying to get at the core of the system that has a huge issue on all of our psyches. And I love comedy. So it kind of even shook me a little bit because I even thought about how like, I love comedy for its social critiques, but how even that can dampen its like effects on critiquing the actual issues that are happening through laughter. And so that was one of my favorite quotes and kind of touches on what Def and Annabelle and Aja both said. So I found it really powerful.
Ooh, thank you for bringing us full circle. Yes, Tiffany, thank you so much. That was amazing. That was amazing. And I definitely felt that quote as well, because I laugh when I get like nervous too. So it's just like, whew, yeah, it just that quote really hit. Wanted to welcome Hollis, who's also facilitating today. Hey, Hollis.
Hi, thank you so much for, hi everyone. I'm jumping in from another call that ran over, but very grateful to be with you all today. Aja, this braid takedown, I'm obsessed. And yeah, just very happy to be with you all today.
And we are still going over our favorite lines and our favorite quotes. So if anybody else wants to put themselves on stack, feel free to drop it in the chat. I wanted to name a quote in the meantime. I honestly think the first sentence of chapter 2 on 17, for those that have the book, patriarchy is the single most life-threatening social disease assaulting the male body and spirit in our nation. That alone is just a word. I'm just like, sheesh, you are not holding back. Like, and I would say like the single most life-threatening social disease, period. Like threatening everybody, threatening all life on earth, period. And I think just to add to like, I don't know if she mentions this, I didn't hear this on our chapter, but when she's defining patriarchy, she goes into, and this is on page 18, which is the second page of the second chapter. She defines patriarchy as, patriarchy is a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything and everyone deemed weak, especially females, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak, and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. And I just wanted to add, like, I think a lot about like nature and the earth, in addition to just like, not only does patriarchy try to like position men over everything else, that includes like also the land and the way that we extract from the land and the way that we take and the way that, you know, all of those relations. So I just wanted to like also add that in our understanding. It's not just like men over women, it's also like men over women and nature and anything else that they deem weak. So that is, we have a few folks on stack. Awesome. Falana is next. I'm glad you were able to switch onto your computer now. We can't hear you. I'm not sure why.
If you can't hear me,
we can hear you now.
Okay, let me mute my computer sound and I'll just talk through the phone because it's going to echo. My goodness.
We still can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm trying to, oh goodness. Okay, so I'm trying to talk through my phone.
I can hear you now.
Yeah, and it seems like the echo has reduced quite a bit.
It echoes better.
Yeah, you're straight.
Okay. So I muted my laptop sound, so I'll just talk through my phone. But I just wanted to piggyback off of what Akeem said about like not realizing, you know, the mother's role in the patriarchy and how, you know, sometimes our projections are taught by women, whether it's like, I don't know, a group chat with women or like being in a sorority or being in something that's woman-based, you know, solely woman-based. You know, a lot of the times, even maybe in a nail salon, you know, women gather and they talk and discuss things, you know, the same way men do. And I've heard a lot of men say like, oh, my only safe space is like a barbershop, or my only safe space is like a sports game or something like that. So I feel like for women, it's the same. And I wanted to talk about page 30. It says, ask feminists to diagnose men's problems and you will often get a very clear explanation. Men are in crisis because women are properly challenging male dominance. Women are asking men to share the public reins and men can't bear it. Ask anti-feminists and you will get a diagnosis that is in one respect similar. Men are troubled, many conversation students say, because women have gone far beyond their demands for equal treatment and are now trying to take power and control away from men. The underlying message, men cannot be men, only used if they are not in control. Both the feminist and anti-feminist views are rooted in peculiarly modern American perception that to be a man means to be at the control and at all times to feel yourself in control. So this reminds me of one of my favorite albums by someone named SZA, and she talks about control in the album. And basically this just kind of relates to you feeling like you need to be in control of things is what triggers a lot of, post-traumatic stress. And I think about, she talked about that in the page before, as a kid, you don't understand that terminology. And if you do, it's mostly associated with being like a war veteran or violence, but post-traumatic stress is just, your reaction to something that can trigger you in your mind. So like unknowingly as kids, we're told something is a certain way. And then when we grow up, we realize we have the same problems because we were taught a certain way. And it's like more reinforced in schools, like they said in the book. So yeah.
Thank you, Falana. I'm glad we got your sound working. Thanks for sharing. Love SZA. Jameson is up next.
I didn't have any. I was just putting facts on when you were talking about.
Oh yeah, my bad.
How it's not just impacting other people, but also subjugation to the land as well. So.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So, sorry. Did somebody say something?
Oh no, I was saying it looks like Tomas is next.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hi, Tomas. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thanks. Mine is on page 50. No group of teenagers is more feared than a pack of teenage boys. This really, it reminded me a lot of Tupac and how he talks about thug life, and a lot of his music talks about, his struggles and the struggles that he faced growing up. And like growing up in a single parent household, I remember my mom would always just, tell me to suck it up and like to not cry, that I'm the man of the house now and that I gotta do, all the things that my father wasn't able to do. So yeah, this one really stood out for me.
Yes, I agree with that as well. Also, she talks about how she in the book was playing marbles and instantly her dad told her, that's something that men do, not women do.
Thanks, y'all, and thank you, Tomas, for sharing. Thank you for also connecting it back to full circle. We started off with Tupac, so that was perfect. And then Def and Annabelle are next.
Yes, I've just underlined this whole book, by the way. Like I'm all over the place, just the whole thing. But page 51, in the middle of that first paragraph, after the statement, boys will be boys, right? Patriarchy both creates the rage in boys and then contains it for later use, making it a resource to exploit later on as boys become men as a national product. This rage can be garnered to further imperialism, hatred, and oppression of women and men globally. I felt like that encapsulated so much, talked about really tying it back to colonialism. And even earlier in this chapter where she says that like the boys are treated like young recruits, it reminded me of when I was growing up and two of my homies, like really young, that I went to church with, I remember their nicknames from their dad was Captain and General. So used to just call Justin, my homie, like the older son, used to call him General, and the younger son was Captain. And my parents called me, my like family name was Manny. And it was like, yo, that's low-key the difference. It's like, like low-key the difference in my upbringing is like I wasn't called a captain or a general. Like that is a lot. But I just really thinking about patriarchy as a container for rage, for later use as a resource, and to really understand where we are here in America as a colonial project. So of course, you raise captains and generals. So I just wanted to table that.
Bars, that's all I gotta say. Eamon is up next.
Yeah, I was really hit by what Def you just said, and had also underlined that same passage, and it connected back for me to an earlier passage at the bottom of page 43 in the printed version. Even though masses of American boys will not commit violent crimes resulting in murder, the truth that no one wants to name is that all boys are being raised to be killers, even if they learn to hide the killer within and act as benevolent young patriarchs. When I read that, I was thinking about growing up, how my dad would have all these outbursts of rage, and how, you know, one of the few things I wanted to be when I grew up was not that. And so I really worked as hard as I could to suppress that rage in me, even though it was there, because I had been wounded by that and hurt by that. And there was actually years where I didn't talk to my dad, and eventually I actually stopped feeling anger, and I thought I was on the right track because it was no longer there. And then I was working as, ironically, as a cowboy, what a symbol of American masculinity. And this bull was like keeping this herd of cows from another herd, and the situation got really tense, and I was alone, and it like built and built and built until something just broke in me, and I just went into a rage, and I like beat the horse I was riding and just started sobbing. And it was scary because I had thought I had suppressed that in me by like being against the rage of my father, or I thought I'd overcome it, but instead I had suppressed it and pushed it down. And then it was even more potent than it ever might have been had I faced it in another way instead of suppressing it, and it boiled over and exploded in this way that showed me how I was not approaching it the right way.
Thank you for sharing, Eamon, and for your vulnerability. I think Brittany had a response, and then we'll go to Shantae after that.
Yes, thank you so much, Eamon. When you were saying that about suppressing rage, and it like, you know, you thought it was okay and it came out again, I immediately just thought about like family, like not that it relates to you obviously, but like people who massacre their families, or like people who do things of that, like men who do that, because like not all the time, but like the most recent one, I forgot his name, John Waits, I think. Like he had no signs of like violence. He never hit his wife. He never hit his kids. He was actually like a stay-at-home dad. He did a lot of chores. Like everyone thought he was super cool. He was like shy and quiet. And then he just snapped one day because of all that repressed anger. And I feel like that's the case for a lot of like these mass murders and these, you know, mass acts of patriarchal rage that we see in our society. It's that thinking that they suppressed it, thinking that it's gone, but then one day it builds up until they finally snap. And I think I find it interesting that you brought up that you saw your father and his rage and you decided that that's what you wanted not to be, because I think Bell Hooks brings that up in a further chapter about a man who was saying that he just thought of what his father would do, and then he just did the opposite. So I feel like that totally resonates with the book and also puts a lot of things into perspective.
Yeah, can I add one more thing? Yeah, thank you, Brittany. I think like that is what really fascinates me about that is just that like the thing that I was practicing to escape from becoming my father in some ways was the very thing that recreated those forces within me. And I was that person that everyone thought was the most gentle, sweet, and kind, but it was still there.
Thanks, y'all. Shantae?
I wanted to share from page 35 in chapter 3, being a boy. The first line says, boys are not seen as lovable in patriarchal culture. And on page 36, she goes on to say, we cannot teach boys that real men either do not feel or do not express feelings, then expect boys to feel comfortable getting in touch with their feelings. And in between that, you know, she talks a lot about attachment and kind of like the how parents previously used these patriarchal values to have differences in how they coddled or held their children. And that like brought up a lot of feelings for me, having many younger brothers and also having a son. One of the things I noticed within my community when my son was a toddler was just kind of this constant urging from everyone to put him down. And it was so confusing because I was like, he's literally still a baby. So why should I put him down? And now, you know, with my niece, I've noticed at the exact same age as he was, there's none of that. No one seems to have any issue with me carrying her the same amount or coddling her the same amount as I did with my son, and you know, and sometimes even more. So there's that to me is one of those things that I also see reinforced in minute levels, and then it carries on and has like these extra restrictions on the interior life of boys as they grow older. And I'm seeing this with my brothers as we've gotten older together and as they're coming into their own, like understanding what a privilege it is to have a rich interior life and to be able to communicate emotionally your emotional states. It's such a privilege that's a factor of patriarchy, and I see it like kind of actively restricting them, but they don't want to give up or lose access to toxic masculinity by engaging in that. And those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Shantae. Thank you for that. And thanks everybody for the vulnerability and just bringing in like the personal life examples. I know we're all just like getting to know each other in this like weird virtual space. So just like gratitude for people that feel comfortable enough to bring in your life experiences. I think that's such a beautiful way to learn together. That's how we apply it. And Caro or Agua, however you want to be referred, is next on stack.
Hi, can y'all hear me well? I'm driving, so I'm connected to my car. Okay, cool. And yeah, that's my not my dead name, but like not the name I go by now. But it's on my phone. So yeah, I go by Agua, he, they pronouns. And it's a little bit of in reference to, I believe, what Eamon was saying, and a few conversations that I had heard before that. Two things. First of all, thank you so much for your vulnerability, because as somebody who's only been surrounded by femmes, hearing your honest experience gives me perspective to understand what it's like to be this identity, because I haven't had access to that very much bringing up. So it's able to help me see things in a more humanist lens by hearing the true reality of what that experience is like and where it stems from, which is suppressing suppressing because you've seen the opposite and you're trying to step away from that. And I think that also the suppression is like a really big thing, because what I want to say was about that. It's basically like you are trying to not be something, but you don't have the means, the resources, the understanding, the assistance, the community to be able to help you healthily not be that. So it's like, you know that that's not what you want, so you turn and walk in the other direction, but you're blind in that direction because you don't have, again, the knowing of where to begin. Like, because it would not be walking in the other direction, it would be walking through it and processing instead. But how do you process when you don't have a community of like-minded individuals who are trying to all together heal through what is happening, you know? Because this suppressed rage or this rage, this happens to everybody regardless of identity, gender identity, cis heteroness, whatever it might be, except that other people have circles where this is either normalized or then demonized as like femmes being hysterical or whatever it might be, you know? So it's just like, how are we able to get resources for folks, or how are we able to get cis het men or het men or however we want to identify men to be able to process through the rage, because the rage is valid. You know, if you're that angry, it's for a reason, but how do you work through it? How do you face the anger in a healthy way and then find coping mechanisms that then help you not traumatize others? Because the point is that we're all traumatized, but how do we stop that trauma within ourselves, process it, heal it, and then find different ways of reacting furthermore from there? And then something else, I again, I'm on the road, so I don't know if somebody else had already mentioned this or if this was like not exactly stated, but and I can't reference the names who had spoken about it, but it was the line about like basically making the kids like mini recruits. And I feel like, I mean, that's just like very, very transparent and being like, this is what gets our people able to be coldless killing machines. And I know that we're talking about colonization and war and things like that, but like dead ass, like I was reading The Body Keeps the Score, and like in the first beginning pages is talking about just how their PTSD analysis of people who are war veterans, and like the like atrocious acts that they cause because of their suppression, like they're just like their outbursts from this. And it's like, that's the same thing that I'm hearing. It's like you are taught to not react and to follow whatever this guide that creates you as a powerful man, quote unquote. And then when you face too much, you literally just boil over and it becomes this chaotic, violent, toxic outburst. So it just goes hands in hand with everything else. It's like, well, how do we process? How do we do this? And how do we get those that are not willing to be in groups like this to do that, to like face the fact that this is going on and that they are the ones that are in power and control of themselves, to be able to recognize, acknowledge, and then seek the ability to process through it. So that's all I wanted to bring to the table.
Thank you, Awa. Appreciate that. Somebody mentioned in the chat, Eamon, thinking about the Audre Lorde quote, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." And then it also raises, I was thinking about a similar question, because on the closing of chapter 3, she says, until that culture changes, we must create the subcultures and the sanctuaries where boys can learn. And so I'm like, what do those subcultures look like and those sanctuaries look like? And I just feel like it really relates to what you were saying. So thank you for that. And Melissa is up next on Stack.
Hi, thank you. Also just want to apologize in advance because I might have to drop as soon as I make this comment. But I kind of noticed throughout the second chapter, just there was a language thing that really was unsettling. And so the title of the chapter being Understanding Patriarchy, but there was so much language in it for me that was like really distancing from understanding. Like it talked about, she talked about, you know, kind of being left in the dark, and this the repeating of the story of her with trying to play marbles, and how it was kind of a tool for remembering, as if like she had forgotten or people had forgotten. And there was just this language throughout the chapter for me that in some cases was, like I said, really distancing from understanding. It was kind of like this denial, even from the onset of just, you know, acknowledging that men who have heard and know the word usually associate it with women's liberation, with feminism, and therefore dismiss it as irrelevant to their own experiences. And I just kind of wanted to bring that up. And I don't know if that ties at all, but I was also kind of recalling the conversation at the beginning about patriarchy promoting insanity. And I truly, like, I went through this and I was like, there's just so much grabbing at me to not understand with this use of language, and just wanted to bring that to the floor.
Melissa, I'm so happy that you've just shared, because one of our next questions was going to be really around what in this week's reading created moments of discomfort. So that was really a wonderful segue. But I'd love to hear more specifically about the language. I know you mentioned the marble story, but I'm now trying to understand a little bit more in terms of what exactly was distancing for you around that. Was it that she repeated? I just want to make sure that I'm understanding clearly.
No, it just was, you know, it was just really striking to me that this chapter was about understanding patriarchy, and then there was this use of language that was really distancing in a way from understanding. Not that I didn't understand, but just the language itself really just kind of, I kept clinging on to, you know, these different words and phrases like, yeah, and, you know, being in the dark, being silenced, repression, just a lot of the language in there that I would not associate with understanding in and of itself.
Sorry, I was on mute and I did a big but no one could hear it. I appreciate that. Thank you for that. I saw that there was also Robert who was on the stack, so I wanted to make sure that he had an opportunity. If you wanted to share a moment in the reading that brought up discomfort for you, you're welcome to do that as well.
Yeah, I think in the chapter about boys, it made me really uncomfortable, like not to the point of tears, but just like to have to stop and put the book down. I'm sure many of us have had that experience reading it, but I have a 17-year-old, well, he's about to be 17 tomorrow, 17-year-old son. And it made me think about ways in which I've done one of two things. One is like corporal punishment, like spanking, or what I called a pow pow. And two, trying to be cool, like even cool, like calm, to the point of detriment in a sense, where you're not expressing overly happy or overly anger through words. And I remember learning that through some of my older male relatives, to like be cool, like be calm. Like it was always like something I thought as positive, but as I get older, I realize it's something that can be really negative, and it just made me uncomfortable, because it was something that I took as a badge of honor when I was younger. Now I see more as harmful. So I'm trying to figure out how can I do that? How can I model that better for my young son? And then just another quick note about making spaces for dismantling this. I have an older mentor who started a zine called Rad Dad, who held space for many men to talk about some of these issues. And it was the first time I was around another guy who talked about that. And it just, yeah, it was really mind blowing to have another dude talk about it. And it was just really helpful for me.
Thank you so much, Robert. Aja, I saw that you were on the stack.
Thank y'all. I'm just ecstatic about this conversation. So I just want to like let y'all know that first and foremost, that this is a dream come true. because I read this book over 10 years ago or around 10 years ago, and to see that this conversation is happening is part of the work that I think needs to be done. So I'm just sometimes we need affirmation and celebration of things to just, to be reminded, like, this feeling, I hope we come back and continue to return to it. And then the other thing I wanted to ask or introduce into the conversation after some things that were shared, I forget there was someone who was speaking who was in a car while they were
That was
speaking.
Agua.
Okay, Agua, yeah. Okay, so while they were speaking, I started to have this question about one of the things that I grapple with, especially while doing this project and conversations that I've had with our team, is around, like, how far are we going to really go when if we're trying to, like, dismantle patriarchy, right? Where does it begin and where does it end? Because when we talk about language, and I see that language keeps coming up as something that is unique to this week than last week, the struggle that we have with language to articulate, to fully encapsulate who we are. Something I don't know if it will come up in this book, but I also wonder where, as we're having these conversations about language right now, do any of these identities ever fully encapsulate us, right? And what is our attachment to continue to to try to use the language that we're given to encapsulate our identity? Like, why do we continue to use, should we be going to a place, if we are to be challenging patriarchy, should we, at times, I wonder, should we be going to a place where all of us seek to be non-binary, or to identify as non-binary? It's a fine line, because I have my own issues with that question, but it's something that, like, I start to kind of, when it starts to get to all the minutiae of, like, everybody's identity and how everybody chooses to identify, if in fact we know it to be true that masculinity and femininity are a spectrum, that we also know it to be true that women and the binary seems to be an invention of patriarchy, then why do we continue to, like, fight to, in any identity group, why do we continue to kind of fight to defend these binaries that don't seem to really ever fully encapsulate us? And I struggle with if we continue to even engage in it, as someone that's working on a project for Black women. Mind you, this is also a privileged conversation in many ways, because we're dealing with women on the continent, and many of the people who identify as women on the continent are still not even considered women, or not treated as human beings in some instances. But we know that people who carry wombs in the world have experienced a specific kind of violence that is not addressed in any other, that the only place that identity has been able to address that violence has been in the identity of woman, but it's not fully ever going to encapsulate what people who have wombs experience, because that's not all that those people are. So I think this is a broad question, but I really want to know what people think about the limitations of language as an identity barrier thing. Okay, I'll stop. I know Agua has a response.
I'm gonna just casually slip in and respond, if that's okay. So I myself identify as a trans masc individual, gender fluid and non-binary. So basically not limited by the concept of woman or man. And I have a womb body. And this is something that, as I've been, and I'm also, like, I'm 30, so, like, it's taken me a while to be able to have really stepped fully into my identity and, like, really understand where I lie, because the body that I have, the femme body, again, like, using these, like, limited words that I have, defines a lot of my experiences, because as much as I identify as a trans man, at the end of the day, I am not visually read in society as a man, and that encapsulates a lot of my experiences, right? So, like, I still, regardless of how I am man, I am still a victim of the patriarchy through the womb body lens, right? And so I think that, like, obviously we all know this, or maybe I'm saying that lightly, but we only have this binary due to colonization. All of our cultures beforehand, if we're not European or like specific European based, had variance within the gender identities and had roles for these folks. So it's kind of like, I think we encapsulate everything, and the concept of feminine and masculine and like receptive and giving and taking and all these things, we all hold all of that within us, and it's just like the levels of which we express it or feel comfortable expressing it. And it's unfortunately the society and the colonial state that makes us choose between these things. So it's like, it definitely needs to be said that the womb bodies are the ones that have experienced the most violence, but it doesn't encapsulate our identities wholly. I agree with that with you, Aja, where it can't define it wholly, because it's impossible to. It makes you pick a side. And the thing is that it's not a side, it's not left or right, it is the ether, it is everything. I would like to think that one day, through decolonization practices, we would be able to achieve this level of non-binaryism, because our bodies do not define us. Our bodies are physical, and our souls, or our beings, our mind is eternal. So it's like, I don't know how we would get to that, but I have a vision of the future where eventually these terms would be archaic, because it doesn't matter if you got, you know, a penis, a vagina, or a mixture of reproductive organs. That doesn't, how should that define the term that you play in society, you know? That was it, by the way.
Whew. Snaps to all of that. A word and a half. Oh my God.
I know. I just text Aja, oh, my brain is exploding. I'm just over here like, woo, okay. Go off. Thank you for that, Agua, and thank you so much, Aja, for raising that question. I see I don't know why I took over for you, Helen, because you got this better than me, but I know that
we got each other.
Okay. Now I can't see my notes, so maybe you can see better.
Kristen is gonna respond to Aja, and then Mark, and then Tiffany, and so on. I put it on the.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Kristen. I use they, them pronouns, and I do identify as non-binary, but I just recently started identifying as non-binary in the past year, so it's a relatively new identity for me. But one thing I wanted to say was definitely, like, I agree with like challenging the gender binary, because that is a part of patriarchy, making people feel like they have to choose between two things, and that those things are the opposite of each other, which is not really true. But also, the making everyone non-binary is not, in my opinion, like the answer, because it's also like forcing a singular choice. Whereas kind of the point of living outside of the gender binary is to be expansive rather than restrictive. So a lot of the non-binary people that I follow and that I've learned from, you know, don't want to define anyone's gender or say that everyone should be non-binary or anything like that. It's very embracing of like, if you identify as a woman, then that's great, and it's up to you, like how you see what a woman means to you, then that's your identity. But it's not defined by anything external other than like yourself. And I've seen a lot of people identify as like a non-binary woman, and like that seems contradictory, but like if it makes sense to you, then like go for it, like use those terms, like, because it's your own internal identity of what that means to you. So yeah, just and also like I've just been reading Love and Rage by Lama Rod Owens, and there's a lot of talk about just creating space. And I think that is a way to challenge patriarchy and, you know, everything that patriarchy is connected to, like capitalism, you know, anti-Blackness, racism, all these things are like very restrictive, and they try to like be very rigid and leave no space. But one thing I feel like we can do around all these things is just to give space around, you know, everything, you know, including like gender identity. This is the thing we're specifically talking about. But if we create space and allow there to be more, just more natural diversity that is inherent to all living things on planet Earth, and not try to, you know, make a one size fits all solution for everything, I think that would actually be one of the things that could be really helpful for people to just naturally evolve in a more non-binary way, as in like not feeling like they have to be one or the other and that's the only choices. So that's just some things I wanted to like bring up as a perspective of someone who identifies as non-binary. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Kristen, for sharing. That was really helpful as well. I think Besaida next to also respond to Aja, and then we'll continue with Mark after that.
Hi, everybody. First and foremost, I'm super grateful to have this space. Thank you for creating this space, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this space as well. So I did want to mention that I deeply, deeply agree with what Aja mentioned and the limitations that she brought up with language. And language is definitely a hard thing to talk about. It's complex, it's limited, but I do think that it is also a key in these discussions to talk about language and definitions, as it plays into the struggle of reinventing words, redefining, and that is part of our history as well, and the history that we make. So it's kind of like language is a reflection of our collective work, our discussions, our strategizing, and our organizing. And so in talking about definitions, I think it's really powerful for us, especially, to be talking about these things because it speaks to the role of institutions. It speaks to the role of defining, which is in connection with the rules that these institutions, these systems work in, and that we respond to. So all that to say, language, to me, what I hear is rules, rulemaking, and rule breaking. So a little bit of rhyme there accidentally. And I also wanted to add, my follow-up question is that in speaking about language, my apologies if I'm asking something that has already been discussed. This is my first time here, but has the group discussed what or defined what masculinity is, or how Bell Hooks is defining it, and whether or not this group agrees with it, or has the definition shifted like within our lives, or, you know, within the course of recent history? I'm not quite clear on that yet.
Get out our planning group, girl.
LOL.
No, you're perfect. Me and Helen both smiled at each other because we literally, when we were chatting through planning, we were like, we have to make space to ask that question and see if we can come up with a working definition. So thank you for that. I think we can, I know there were a few more folks who wanted to respond to Aja's question, but I think that would be a great thing for us to explore right after, as it was one of the things that we had on the docket. I'm right?
Yeah. Yeah, and we can just also bring up the question now, is because we asked this last session too, is what is the difference between masculinity and patriarchy? So we definitely wanted to return to that now that we've like read the second chapter about understanding patriarchy. So just like thinking about in this effort of like defining things ourselves, we actually are in the practice of this as a team at Voices, because we have this thing that we've been working on called descriptions of difference, that we use instead of, it's basically defining things, but creating our own meaning of things and like defining things ourselves. through this like feminist understanding. And so, yeah, we wanted to definitely collectively ask, what is the difference between masculinity and patriarchy, and what are masculinity and patriarchy, and just try to answer those questions together. So thank you for that, Besaida. You're a fucking poet. Thank you. I think the next person, I'm trying to see, because
Can I just say something really quickly, Helen, in response to that? I also want to leave room for the fact that as we're thinking about this play and like how it's going to come out into the world, and also the solidarity journal that we want to create in collaboration with it, you all are kind of the ones that are helping us figure this out. I think we are as a team are doing that and organizing in the relationships we have, but also to kind of help expand on what Helen just talked about, that, you know, when I was thinking about this, I was like, well, we really need to think about language and go into how we use language and the definitions of difference, or the descriptions of difference. I think it's like a really good way for us to start to collectively think about how do we create new words or new combinations of words, or if there are things that while you all are reading that you think could help us start to think about new ways of talking about a thing, or something that comes up for you that like there needs to be a new phrase around this. Like, please feel free to suggest those things as well. Over the next few weeks, we can bring those up. Like, what are some words or things that were challenging, or what are things that you feel like we should expound on in terms of definitions around? And I think that would help us also create more tools in our toolkit.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you for bringing that up, Aja. Somebody made a group chat, a Discord, so I will add that information on the chat soon so that we can continue the conversation. There's so much to talk about, and this is so juicy. So Mark's up next, and then Tiffany after that.
Thank you. This is such an amazing discussion. I don't want to take up too much time. There's so much to discuss. But since we're talking about language right now, something that I've sort of been visualizing and how masculinity relates to patriarchal masculinity, which she goes into a bit, is like, if you think about gender identity as a spectrum, you know, patriarchal masculinity is asking men and boys to be exactly, you know, you talk about space. Well, there's no space. It's like you have to be at the full end of that spectrum, whatever masculinity in the context of patriarchy looks like, which is largely this idea of suppressing emotions and containing rage. And so I think, you know, there's the gender identity, which is personal, but then patriarchal masculinity adds the political to that. Somebody was talking about environmentalism earlier and how patriarchal masculinity informs climate change in a lot of ways. So it's so, when you add the patriarchal aspect to masculinity, it informs everything: wars, you know, any kind of destruction. So, you know, I don't know. I definitely am not trying to answer any language questions. But I think masculinity can be something that has space and is part of this broader spectrum, whereas patriarchal masculinity is forcing people to be a straight line on the far end of that. And just before I get off, to go circle to affirming what Robert said earlier, I also have been a part of a few spaces that are all male identified people discussing patriarchy. And it's crazy because you totally see that moment where people, myself included, have never, you become an adult male and never articulate or discuss these things because the language really is not conditioned. So it's like talking about the brutal language that bell hooks can use and how it might, you know, not, it may be not the most sensitive language. It seems to me like she's coming from a place of being hurt by the system of patriarchy, where she talks about her father and her partners. And so I don't think she necessarily answers a ton in this book, but really asks these big questions and forces us to look at it. And how can we answer these major questions, some of which we've talked about here today, I don't know, I guess that's the journey we're all on. So with that, I'll wrap it up. I'm done speaking now.
Thanks, Mark. Tiffany's up next.
Yeah, so this is even before Aja pointed out the question, and kind of going off what Mark just said, and bringing it back into the book on page like 56 in the EPUB version. She's talking about like the full humanity of boys, and she mentions James Garbarino. So there's a line saying, without ever using the word patriarchy, psychologist James Garbarino does suggest in Lost Boys that the cultivation of an androgynous selfhood, one that combines the traits deemed by masculine and feminine. And I circled that phrase because I think that's, like, of course, the precursor of like kind of the word androgyny is kind of a precursor of these ideas of non-binary. And I don't see as an answer, at least yet, but an exploration. And another book that I kept thinking about in terms of that passage is this book by Julia Ward Howe, who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. She's in women's suffrage. And she had this lost book called the Hermaphrodite. They found all the manuscript papers to it, collected and published it in 2004, around the same time as this book. And it's about this intersex person in their adulthood who, in the first half, acts in society in the early 19th century as a woman and then as a man. And it's really interesting because at the time that she was writing this, her husband was like very in this intimate relationship with his best friend, in the terms of that they would write letters that were super just romantic. And in that time, she wrote this book. And I thought it was at first, when I first read it about 6 years ago, I was like, wow, like, how is he gonna make her feel lonely? I kind of blamed him for why she was writing this book and why she felt the need to. But now as I read this, I wonder if it was her own exploration of understanding kind of this intimacy that was developing with her husband and his best friend, and whether that friendship was just a way for those two men to explore emotional feelings, even in a time so early as that. So I kind of see it as like an exploration. We are kind of, I think the first part of dismantling this rigid language is seeing what's in the in-between, what's in the gray area. So yeah, that's.
Can you share the name of the book or drop it in the chat for us?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Appreciate you.
Thanks, Tiffany. Falana up next.
Hello, yes?
Oh gosh, echo is back.
Okay, is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just gonna talk through my phone, even though I'm on here twice, but I just kind of wanted to piggyback off. I don't know who said it before everyone went, but talking about like the new ways and new terminology. I agree with the new ways and new terminology, but until it's like taught in schools, we'll never be able to use it in like the American like dialect, because we'll always end up having to explain, this is the new terminology, this is the new way. So maybe like focusing in on what exactly we mean, like knowing ableism versus like gaslighting, or knowing like toxic masculinity versus fragile masculinity, knowing the difference in like the different terminology and words that we use, like even going back to talking about being non-binary, knowing exactly what that means, because it's going to be a while before, that is integrated into schools. And then even so, like, it's state-based. So like here in Florida where I live, and I think in Texas, they just banned teaching critical race theory in schools because I guess some white students felt offended by it or whatever you may have you. So now kids are going to grow up not even knowing critical race theory here, but maybe in another state, they were taught that from a young age. So I think it goes back to, you know, just learning things at a young age, you know, even down to like homophobia and racism, like beyond the patriarchy.
Thank you, Kalana, for bringing up the role of state institutions and reinforcing patriarchy. That's super important. I think if we can imagine it and rewrite the language, then we can begin to like re-educate ourselves and our children and our children's children. Def and Annabelle up next.
Yes, a buffet of things to chew on here. So going to what Aja tabled, I love it. And I do want to say, Falana, I want to say, speaking to that, like knowledge production, that's happening now, and I love this. And usually theory is like, it's gonna be lived first. And although we're not going to be able to, like in Florida, how that is going to be a barrier, I feel like we've always kind of had to wait until college when you can be put in debt to actually engage with critical theory. So it's a war against the poor, really.
Right, exactly. And that even goes back to like economics and them not teaching us, you know, what credit is, or teaching us about depreciation value until like senior year of high school, when most of us already have jobs, we already have cars, we're already integrating that to society. And it's kind of like a setup in a way, because the patriarchy knows that they're doing this. They already know their plan, because, you know, in a richer household, you know, they already built their generational wealth. They already know the ins and outs of what they need to teach their children. And like you said, someone going to college for the first time or being like the first person to graduate, they don't really grasp that until later. And that even goes back to the book and like her relating to how males and females don't even realize what trauma and PTSD is until they get older and they're triggered by those things.
Word, yeah, absolutely, I agree. When speaking of language, something I'm reading this book also called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer.
So good.
So good. And something that I wanted to bring in tight was.
Can you type it in the chat for me?
Oh, yeah.
I'll read it while you read it.
For sure. Because I just wrote down a bunch of stuff because I was like, oh, I can't remember everything. So when speaking to language, English is 70% nouns and 30% verbs. So in English, you're either a human or a thing. And so these languages, European languages, often assign gender to nouns. And so how we're not, like, we are learning from the jump to noun and objectify, and we need to verb more. And so this colonial tongue is going to be limited, right? So as a person that recently is identifying, like during this time of quarantine, and we call it quarantimes, a colonial tongue being limited, like I'm identifying as non-binary, and it's just where I am currently. And I want as much freedom within the performance of gender, because gender being a performance, but also understanding that that in the reality, I've been read in a masculine body this whole time, right? So I like grapple with the reality that, shit, am I like letting myself off the hook by identifying as non-binary? So it's like, oh, it's the niggas over there. Or like, or am I every? And what I'm really looking for is I want everybody to have the ability to have range. It's a full in every direction of personage without condemnation for it. So like, but it is still a struggle as far as like knowing how I'm read and knowing that I have benefited from patriarchy directly. To go back to the book on page 35, the first paragraph saying being a boy, I just underlined this part of the sentence in the very first paragraph. Status and even the rewards of privilege are not the same as being loved. And that hit me so hard. Because it was like, it's not just like, yeah, it's this privilege. I felt like I could use that in so many places. It's like when it comes to like the privileges that in this paradigm white people have, it's the statuses and those rewards are not the same as being loved. It's not the same as being fully personed. But since we're using this colonial tongue, it takes us how many books to talk about it? So I am grappling with the tool of language, and I feel so limited by it. The last thing I will share is that my mom taught me how to read because I was told I could not be taught how to read. And they wanted to hold me back in kindergarten from first grade. And so she just checked me out of school, period. It was like, nah. And I didn't go back to school until third grade. But one thing she used to tell me is, stop making things up, because I would see words and I would see something else, right? Mm-hmm. And on page 22 of this book, The Will to Change, last night I was reading it aloud, and reading aloud really hits different. So I would suggest that if you have the space to do it. But the middle paragraph where it says, without a shred of malevolence. And I said, last night I was reading aloud, I was like, without a shred of male violence, the stare of my son transmitted a message. And I was like, wait, there's something about the creation of new language and kind of going with that. It's like malevolence and male violence. There's a relationship here. So even though we have this tool, this colonial tool that's not really serving us and it makes us talk too much, we should talk more. And those beautiful accidents are great. So go for it.
Oh,
if you have
yeah.
anything to go.
Yeah, thank you. I also identify as non-binary, and I actually don't remember the name of the person who was saying that it seems possibly contradictory to also be a woman, but I don't think that it's authentic for me to not identify as a woman, because I've lived that experience as well my whole life. So I identify as both. And not that anyone made me feel like it was contradictory, just wanted to put that out there as an example of that lived experience. But yeah, I wrote down so that I could listen my thoughts earlier, and I wrote that it reminds me kind of with this question of how to challenge language, like how do we challenge language? It made me think initially of the prevalence of beginning passages in so many religious scriptures, as well as spiritual ones, of the word, you speak it and then it becomes, and the power of word and how incredible that is. And it also reminded me that what we repeat becomes programmed. Sorry about this chaos outside. And basically, I thought about my own struggle with pronouns. Wow, we got the whole.
It's the actual police.
Yeah. Talk about colonization. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's like 6 cars.
Sorry, y'all. It's always some sort of mess outside. Yeah. But I just wanted to share that I had, for a chapter of my life, was also really struggling with they, them pronouns when it was a new concept to me. Oh my God, this shit is so wild.
Hey, that's like 4 more cars, yo.
I know, yeah. So hopefully that'll be it. But yeah, I also struggled with that. But the power of repetition is really what I wanted to touch on, is that like through practice, we can deprogram, decolonize, and rewild our language and reintroduce ourselves to ourselves that exist underneath all of the programming, because I feel more and more as I've become further into myself as a non-binary specimen here, it's really shedding back layers of what I'm not. And I think that that's the power of language, of accurate language. So as the colonial bombardment continues outside.
Yes. Wow. Peeling back, yes to peeling back the layers, and fuck the police always. And Yes, we wanted to introduce, we have about 20 minutes left with each other tonight. It's been so juicy. And we wanted to introduce a kind of like wrap up question, which is what are some things that we want to leave behind in this conversation? And what are things that we want to take with us? And I think Shantae is on stack probably to answer something previously, which is totally okay, but just definitely sit with that question and then let us know when you're ready to speak.
I can go now because I think it ties in to your closing question. I did want to share a quote that I look at every single day because I love this conversation around language. I love what I heard from Zeph and Annabelle and what I read from Brittany saying etymology is real. And Toni Morrison says, definitions belong to the definers, not the defined. And I, would like to implore us to explore this more in our reality, not only in the conversation of patriarchy, but literally, I love what Zeph said about wanting people to have more range. What ways, I guess what I'm trying to say is I would like to leave behind the restrictions I place on myself in terms of my voice, and then in turn ask others within my community to place on themselves and how they express. So I like I think a lot in images and in words, and sometimes that makes it very difficult to convey exactly what I mean. And that also gives me a lot of access to imagination and reimagining and redefining what it means to be a person, especially a person who immediately arises in a dichotomous existence. Like even the fact that we are immaterial in some sense and material in another sense, like the limitations of language and the limitations of patriarchy, the limitations of the gender binary. I mean, we could go on and on for days. I think I'd like to leave that behind, those limitations. Thank you guys for this beautiful space.
Y'all are really going off today. I needed a second. That was so good. I'm just like, this is on another level. Amazing. Yes, please sit with the question of what you want to leave behind and what you want to take away. And I just wanted to uplift something that Eamon said in the chat. I am really drawn to the idea of a society without the binary. I am thinking though about people in my life who have gender euphoria after changing their pronouns, yes. And that euphoria exists within some experience of a binary, which means the binary holds in it the possibility to produce joy in addition to pain and oppression. Whew, yes, yes, I've also been thinking about that. Thank you. Anybody else have a takeaway or anything they want to leave behind? Kristen.
I just wanted to say, I want to leave behind the idea that this settler colonial nation state and all the rules that go with it are valid, and that we need to live by them and define ourselves by their definitions and rules. And remember that this land that we live on and the way that, that we should live our lives, if anything, should align with Indigenous people and the way that they view, what is like being human, having, a relationship the earth, to the animals, to everything around us. And if we're gonna like go by any kind of rules, that's the rules we should be going by, because those were the people whose lands we came to, and that everything else is not legitimate. And so that can like open up a lot of spaciousness, I think.
Aja.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Helen Hollis for facilitating, and Brittany. And also, I want to leave room for people who this conversation is like new. You know, I think some of us are a bit more well versed in some of the language around kind of decolonizing language and like gender stuff. And so we are, I think Helen mentioned this earlier, that we are all learning. And I think having, as much as we try to show that we need compassion for folks who don't know, that I think I hope that folks who don't know all the language or don't have all the, I think feel equipped to speak about everything, that you have compassion for folks who on the other end too, because I think that this is what is powerful, or one of the takeaways that I came with today is just the space is so important. Creating the space for us to create, to have discourse about who we are and why we're here together is always going to be so important and so necessary. And I feel like, I think Eamon said it or someone else said it earlier, but giving masculinity, also creating space for masculinity to understand what that is, you know, or to even define what it is for itself. I still think that it has not been given the same space, or has not, I don't think there's been a lot of agency or initiative to try to create that space, as much as those who identify as women have fought and charted out, you know, to try to create space for femininity. And I think that one of the things that I hope comes from this is that we don't see it as one space is supposed to be created by one group or one identity, but that I hope after this, or because of this, or through this, we find ourselves creating more and facilitating more conversations beyond this about what is masculinity look like in our homes, how do people identify in our communities, and just asking questions about why they identify that way, and what does it mean to them to identify that way. I think would be really useful, and it could be good to come back to the next conversation about some of those things that we are grappling with in this book, and how we're having discussions with people about what those things are. So I think that's something that could be good to take away.
Yes, thank you, Aja. Thank you for that. And also thank you to all of you for just making it out today, and for just deciding to do this on a Wednesday evening, wherever you are. Thank you for tuning in and joining a group of strangers to talk about patriarchy and read and nerd out about all this stuff. I personally feel very held and like grateful and supported in this space, just even to have the space to talk about these things, which I think, you know, a lot of us sometimes get stuck in like our own internal monologues, or just like kind of reading by myself and just like thinking about these things and thinking about things are shifting. Like we're in it's a crazy time to be alive. Late capitalism is fucking weird, and we're inventing things as we go. So it's just like, you know, just that tension of like, we're creating a new language for gender, but we're still like being oppressed through a specific lens. So like the specificity versus the wanting to be as expansive is what I'm like sitting with still. And so I'm just grateful to be able to have the space to make sense of that. with y'all. So I just wanted to invite people, as we're talking about takeaways, this isn't really a takeaway, but as we're talking about takeaways, you can also talk about how you feel and how, you know, this space made you feel in the last 10 minutes, anything that you want to take away, and also how you're feeling in this moment after this conversation. Tiffany, if you want to go up next.
Yeah, I just want to say, I guess the biggest takeaway is learning, or just learning what I need to unlearn in general. I think is, you know, I came, you know, with this in mind that I would just affirm what I already know. But literally the first page of this book completely made me realize that, oh, I'm gonna be unlearning some stuff. So I also think that, and this goes to a recent event with Pierre Moss, where like a speaker talked about how it's not about, I think maybe, let me just backtrack and just say, maybe it's not just about identity. I think we can be so individualistic, but I mean, look at what we're doing right now. We're building a community through exploring these ideas and trying to disrupt them or dismantle them or think about them in new ways. So I think that's more of the beauty of it all, is that in this exploration, we're building a community. And I think that's something that I think is funny, is that, you know, we talk so much about identity as a community. And I think that's something I'm going to think about a little bit more too.
Thanks, Tiffany. Jameson up next.
Wait, can we, what happened with Pierre Moss?
I was like, never mind.
What, did something go wrong? What happened? I don't be knowing. What happened?
There was a speech allegedly. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Pierre Moss is this like Black fashion designer label owned by a curvy jean. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I ramble. So the beginning of it, Elaine Johnson, and I hope I didn't get her last name wrong, she was a former Black Panther, does the whole speech in a recent show, Couture show, and he does it's all about Black inventions, that's part of it. And she talks a little bit about identity and how sometimes maybe that's not only the focus, but also just community and contributing to a community. So yeah, that was just, I was trying to not talk too much, but that
know who you talking
into it.
Thanks, Tiffany. Jameson, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to everyone who's been sharing today, as well as to all of our facilitators. I think this is a space I can just speak to, just to be vulnerable for it. Like, I've been longing for something like this, because too much to what Belle writes about, these spaces aren't easily carved out in especially white cis hetero circles, right? Like, this is not something that I'm easily able to go and have a conversation around these topics, despite the fact that I've been ruminating, contemplating, thinking about them for, you know, like 10 plus years in my life. So it feels really, really special and an honor to be a part of it. And I think a takeaway that I have from all of this really fruitful conversation is just this through line that keeps coming back up is this idea around space, which I kind of equate to freedom, which is the antithesis of what the patriarchy is, which is subjugation and control. And it's not just people like me who are like, obviously have all this privilege that comes from, which is also one of my favorite quotes from it, but like, I'm also neglected because I've been deprived of love, and I've been deprived of what it actually means to be fully human, which is to integrate the emotional side of me. I've cut off my emotions. You know, that's like we were all, as a lot of boys were taught as kids. And I'm still trying to reclaim that, you know, like, what does it mean to be a man? You know, like that, I'm asking that question now, like, you know, not the way that I was taught growing up. Yeah, and I think that means like it's a reclamation, and it's thinking about what do I need to change within myself, which is also like just such a scary fucking thing to look at, because you're not just like trying to change some like esoteric thing out there, the patriarchy. It's like, no, I'm changing myself, which is really just difficult work. So I think what I want to be leaning into is like, what do I need to give myself the space and freedom to be and to become, as well as to change, and what are the things that are controlling me that I need to let go of. Thanks, all.
Thank you so much for that, Jameson. I know I said it earlier after Agua spoke that my brain is just like on overload, to be very honest with you. And I appreciate Aja, you sharing, that this is a beautiful space for, okay, I'm having your same situation, Deb. That this is, okay, that this is a really beautiful space for folks who are still exploring and figuring it out and don't quite have the answers. I know, not that anybody is saying that they have the answers, but I've really been sitting with what you just shared, Annabelle, and someone else around the identity of being non-binary but a woman. And that's something I'm just gonna continue processing. So I just appreciate everybody's vulnerability and the safe space to explore all of these ideas.
Thank you, Hollis. Agua says, same as a trans man with only examples of toxic masculinity, celebrated maleness. For celebrated maleness, what does it mean to be a man? That's a really important question. And also thank you, Jameson, for bringing that one up. We were in the whole process of like coming up with this campaign. We were originally we wanted to like really answer that question, like really like figure out what that looks like. And so we were originally thinking, let's like have this whole campaign on like, what is masculinity? But then we felt like that was limiting. And so we reached the conclusion, let's just make this a book club. And part of that campaign was like, we wanted to uplift examples of like a healthy masculinity, but we're even struggling to do that. And we like brought up Malcolm X as an example of like an example of a kind of masculinity that honored femininity and protected women and challenged the patriarchy. But even still, like thinking of other examples to list feels hard. And so if people think of anything, let us know. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. And I think somebody else wanted to speak, Sab. Last person.
Hi. Thank you for holding this space, you guys. This is the first time I'm stepping into any type of Zoom room that is having difficult, empowering conversations over society. It's been a while. I'll just answer the question to keep it short. I'm a little nervous, my throat is blocked, but it's a nervous because I know this is work that I need right now. And I wanna leave behind a lot of the guilt and shame that has come up in reading this about the patriarchy that exists in me and in the systems that I know that I'm a part of, whether it be family, like just recognizing it, having always recognized it, but now having better tools to identify and then having it reflected back emotionally in me is giving me it's taking me for a ride. So I kind of want to leave the like the immersed experience behind and accept it as it is and move forward to process and build through this. And then I want to take with me everything and this video and all the books, but the thing that has stuck out to me when we were talking about language, there's a line there's a line describing James Garbariano's Lost Boys book, and it just says, they fail to offer a courageous alternative vision, one that would fundamentally challenge patriarchal masculinity. And I think what I want to take with me is the intention to not only identify and see, but also imagine or, metabolize, okay, in what way can this be reimagined or reworded, or like finding those new combinations of words to put together to be able to converse with people who are struggling with this also, because I think I find myself a lot of the times just not knowing how to say it, like how to break through. So what I want to take with me is the intention to constantly be imagining what this constantly imagining what this less patriarchal version of life would be. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sab. That was the perfect closing. Thank you for your voice. Thank you all for coming today. This was fucking amazing. Honestly, better than I had imagined, and it just keeps getting better. So we'll meet again in 2 weeks. We'll have another round of facilitators. We'll send out some of these links and also the Discord chat so people can join. I think the link that I sent wasn't working. So we'll send another link out. Check in for those emails, and yeah, have a great evening. Thank you so much again, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Hollis and Brittany, we could stay on with Helen to the end.
Sorry, I've got to run.
Till the end.
You better run, come see me. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful night.
Oh my God. Okay.
Have people left? How do y'all feel?
This discussion was so freaking good. Like, it was like, I know last time was like cool, but because we were like on the preface and stuff, but this one, like, everybody was talking, like everyone had something to say, no awkward silences. And I feel like folks were just more comfortable and able to express their vulnerability and stories more. And I was just eating it up. It was so good.
I'm so used to like very hyper structured meetings that always have a goal and like just things to do and like commitments to get and like all this stuff like yeah, and so it just to have this open space is really nice, just to like we have some structure but we also like let the conversation go where it needs to go. I think that was beautiful to just like, I wasn't expecting that it would go there around the gender stuff, and I was like actually really grateful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just continue to appreciate folks' vulnerability. Like even the gentleman who shared about, I guess in the moment of discomfort, like recognizing the ways that he's shown up as cool towards his son. And there was someone else who shared something pretty vulnerable, but that struck me and, just made me feel inspired, like, okay, we're heading in the right direction. And then, I had lots of thoughts as I shared around expansive gender and what, I couldn't even write my questions quickly enough because it was a lot, and I wanted to make space for people to really share their thoughts without having to respond and say, I don't understand what you're saying. But yeah, I thought the conversation was rich.
Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the points that really, really hit me was when Eamon was talking about how he was in a place of rage and he beat the horse. And I was like,
I can't imagine Eamon doing that at all.
Me either, but it was like I could, because it'd be the quiet ones. And I was like, because I'm also watching this doc. I don't know if y'all have seen it, but y'all should watch it. It's called Exterminate the Brutes. And it's on HBO. It's like a 4-part series. And it's the brother who wrote, he's Haitian American, but he wrote, he didn't wrote, he's their director. He did, I think his name's Raul something. He did I'm Not Your Negro. And there's this point where he kind of shows that when men, like when you're left to your own devices, this is the thing that's hard though, right? It's like when men are left to their own devices, but he doesn't say that. He kind of says like when human beings are left to their own devices, what it shows is that people will go to their most like natural savage like instincts. And I'm grappling with this question right now about, you know, just like what is human, and like what are things that are innately in us, that like that quote unquote civilization has like, or society has kind of made it seem as if like we that there's some moral high ground about what is good or what is right or what is righteous. And just thinking about like what can bring people to the point of hysteria or rage or violence, internalized, and do we see that happening with women, or people who identify as women? Because I do think that there's a place that you can be brought to, that the human person can be brought to where I don't know if these identities really matter. Do they stop people from becoming, you know, does the identity like actually, you know, is that going to stop them from being innate, like doing the thing that's like, that I guess we're susceptible to as human beings? And when he said that, I thought it was like very vulnerable for him to admit that, one. Two, that part of, I think the part that I can't contend with, that we have, or I don't know how to contend with, and I don't know if you guys felt this way, is just the rage, the internalized rage and violence and anger that is felt. And I can't say that I don't have that same rage and anger. But I don't know that it has always translated to violence. Outwardly, maybe. A lot of times it's translated into self, you know, afflictions and stuff like that. But even then, I don't think it's as hostile and as as violent as like, I can't imagine myself beating something to the point of it's like, you know, like it's like they're in the film. I just would love for y'all to watch, because in it, it's just like, it goes to show how like even a Black person who had these white indentured servants, the anger of the society he was in and the frustration of that system and the conditions that he was in brought him to the point of which he could not stop beating this man. And we think, oh, well, as Black people or as women, we would never do that. But I just start to wonder, like, is there a point that we could be brought to where we could do that? And it made me think all these things. So yeah, I really appreciate Amy saying that, and having the men in the space to speak freely is really, I think is really helpful.
In response to like what you were saying about like the human condition and like how much of us is like social and how much of us is natural. I don't have the book with me. I wish I did, but in a social theory book that I have, it talks about how humans are only human in like a human setting, and around society is what teaches us what is human. Because when we look at people who didn't grow up around other human beings, they aren't the same socialized. Like, we have to be socialized to be human, is basically what the quote is saying. So I feel like as a woman, I wasn't taught that a way to handle my anger and rage was through violence. I was taught other forms of coping mechanisms and other ways to express that rage and feeling. But I feel like with men, they're taught to, first of all, transmute all of their emotions into anger and rage, and to also like only express that anger and rage through violence and domination. So I feel like in that sense, like we carry the same rage, but we're taught and socialized to handle it differently. And in the sense of like, I feel like that's the case. And then also like with the, I think it's interesting too that he said that humans are like this when he was actually talking about men, because it's like he was thinking about men in that sense, and not like all of us, like low-key a little sexism in play. But like, yeah, I feel like, yeah, I don't know.
I'm definitely gonna watch that movie, Aja. I love that director. I like his other films a lot too. So thanks for that recommendation. I also loved all the resources that were shared today, like all the books, all the podcast links, like people were fucking quoting other people. Like it was rich. It was a rich discussion. I'm really happy about the people that are joining this space. I also like Shantae, for example, there are some people that submitted to the project that are here. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, like just excited about the people that we're gathering. And I guess since Swetha sent out that email, we'll probably get more people that submitted or are on our email list now that we have one um, to join the space. And so it just feels good because it feels like people are excited and we'll get to define certain things together for the solidarity toolkit. I think what would be cool is like I would be really excited if by the end of the book club we can collectively define something like patriarchy or collectively define masculinity. We keep trying to come back to it each session, but I think it would be cool to like by the end come up with some kind of like definition together, because I think that would be beautiful to include in both our social media but also the solidarity toolkit and just feel like we did that together. And yeah.
Sounds good.
Cool. All
Super
right.
down.
To do the next book club.
You said who's doing the next book club?
Mm-hmm.
I volunteer, Aja and I.
Should we ask Kate like this? Like, should we ask Kayla? Like, is Kayla involved, or should we just not and rely on this formation?
I think we could ask, but like, yeah, and just see.
Okay. All right. Okay, y'all. Well, have a good night. Thank you so much.
Good night, Helen.
Thanks, Helen. Appreciate you holding it down. Thanks, Sasha. Bye-bye.
That's silly.
I know.
That's so bad. Can't hear you. Okay, bye.
She's gone. Bye, Bo.